Guys, we'll take care of a little housekeeping stuff first. Obviously, everybody knows why we're here. We want to talk about buyer agent representation, buyer broker compensation, all of these things, all of these changes that have occurred. But first of all, just kind of a disclaimer. We're not discussing specific commission percentages or commission totals, anything like that. Uh, that's obviously not our goal today, and so there's no need to discuss anything like that. As we know, commissions have always been and will continue to be negotiable between the buyer and the seller, and also between buyers and agents and sellers and agents, listing agents. Also, probably more important, Jeff and I aren't attorneys. We're not attempting to provide any type of legal advice. We're simply offering up what we believe to be the best practices after spending so much time on this over the last year. It's important that admits another one. It's important that whatever you take away from here today, whether it's what you think might be improved processes, improved communication, any type of document, anything we talk about regarding documents, which, oh, by the way, we have nothing to hide. Our documents have been approved by our attorneys, and if anybody would like to see, our listing agreement, our purchase agreement, any addendums that we might talk about today, please, feel free to reach out to one of us, and we'll be
Look,
certainly more than happy to provide that.
the good news is, Aaron, we're not attorneys, so we will not be speaking in legalese today. We'll just be plain English. Be good.
Yes, that is the good news. Um, and so I want to get started with just one key point, right? We have there's in last year there's really been two things going on that we as real estate agents and real estate brokers have been paying attention to. We had the NAR settlement, and Jeff will talk a little bit about that here in a little bit. But then we also had changes at the Iowa state level, the Iowa code level, the commission level, right? And so I want to make sure that everybody understands that we really have two different entities here that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about NAR and the code of ethics, and if we don't abide by the code of ethics, you can have an ethics complaint, things like that. And so that would be like an NAR ethics violation. But then we also have Iowa code, which are the changes to the law, right? To the Iowa code. And uh, so real quick, on actually, Jeff, why don't you talk about the NAR lawsuit a little bit, and I'll jump in once you kind of describe that and what happened there and where we're at today.
Yeah, so long story short, on the the NAR lawsuit, there was some plaintiffs in the state of Missouri that brought a case against NAR, National Association of Realtors. We can all have our own opinions on that. I'll publicly state that I think that it was a money grab by attorneys and very unnecessary. However, what came out of that was sellers stating that they were under the impression they did not know that they didn't have to pay commissions, or there was a certain level of commission they didn't have to pay. So what that means is the DOJ, Department of Justice, try to figure out a way that they thought would be in the best interest of the public to have some sort of extra transparency, even though everything's always been as transparent as it possibly can. However, two things came out of that then. Okay, two things came out of that settlement that did change the landscape. Basically, one, now buyer representation agreements are now law. As Aaron alluded to, Iowa made that state law on July 1st. So if you've been working with a buyer agent, or if you are a buyer agent, since July 1st, you have to have a buyer representation agreement signed. And we're going to go into great detail on what that is. Secondly, compensation will no longer be offered on the MLS. So multiple listing service, MLS, previously a listing agent could list what that potential compensation would be to a buyer agent through the transaction or through the process. A buyer agent, what's that?
It could be displayed on the MLS.
It could be displayed on the MLS. That's correct. It could be displayed on the MLS. Now we will not have that ability. Agents won't have that ability, buyer agents. They'll have to communicate with the listing agent in regards to what, what if any buyer broker compensations being offered.
Yeah, and those, I think most agents and most brokers think that those are the two key main points. But I want to talk about a few other points that might affect the public, might affect some brokers out there too. So I'm just going to go down the list here because all these key points came right off of the actual legal documentation, the settlement between DOJ and NAR. So just a few key points that some of you may not be aware of. One is that brokers and agents may not facilitate any non-MLS mechanism to make offers of compensation. And that's an important one because as agents and brokers, again, and even the public, you may have heard some of these other businesses, some of these other companies trying to start up front-facing databases and things like that, where everybody can, all agents and brokers can coordinate and let that data, supply their information to that database. Here's our offer. Here's my seller's offer of compensation. Well, that's actually illegal according to the settlement. Basically, and I should say, as long as admit another one here, as long as it is not related to the MLS, I suppose that can be done. But if the MLS is not going to be involved in that, that would be super inefficient. But anyway, so there's not going to be any magical place that you're going to be able to go online and just see all of the cooperative compensation that sellers are offering for a certain MLS. It's not going to happen. Okay, prior to a showing, you have to have this signed prior to a showing. This does not mean listing alerts. Okay, so for all of you agents and brokers that have set up listing alerts for your clients, which is good practice, there was some confusion that, well, is that considered a showing? Right? Is a virtual tour considered a showing? And the answer is no. Okay, a physical at the property showing is what is required. Now, compensation regarding the buyer, the compensation between the buyer and the buyer's agent must be a precise number, right? Most of us know that already, but you can't say, well, as the buyer's agent, I can't say, well, I'll just work for whatever the seller is willing to pay me on that particular property. That's not a thing, and you can't do that. You have to. You're going to work for a certain commission, whatever your brokerage has determined is going to be the commission that they charge. Okay. The buyer agent may not receive more than their agreed upon compensation unless the buyer and the buyer's agent amend their contract. So there is a way for a buyer's agent to receive more compensation than what is on the buyer's representation agreement, but the buyer and the buyer agent have to agree to amend that contract, just like you can amend a listing contract. Okay. A buyer's agent may not, and again, this is all part of the settlement. These are a lot of things that some of you agents and brokers may not have heard, but a buyer's agent may not represent that their services are free, like many of them used to. The buyer's agent may not represent that their services are free unless they actually do not receive any compensation. And if you're a buyer's agent that isn't receiving compensation, I hope you're not working for RE/MAX. Commissions are not set by law; they are negotiable, and they are set by the broker. We all know about that disclosure that has to go with every representation agreement and listing agreement now. And this is a pretty easy one too. Buyer agents, buyer brokers may not filter listings based upon the compensation being offered, right? That is a no-brainer. We don't show properties just because they offer compensation, right? That is certainly not in the best interest of our buyer. We show all properties that our buyers want to see regardless of compensation. Even when compensation was on the MLS, I never looked at what compensation was. I don't think I ever knew until we got to closing. I mean, so that can never be a thing. Can never be a thing. And this is one thing that I don't think that anybody's talked about, but this was the last part of the settlement, and it says all of these obligations terminate in 7 years. So after 7 years, I believe that all of this will be revisited, but it says that anything in the settlement, any of these obligations terminate in 7 years. So those are some other key points that, again, a lot of us really haven't heard or paid attention to, but just as equally as important. So, Jeff, that was a lot there. What's next?
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely, and there is a lot. There's a lot to unpack, and we're going to kind of get into a couple of the main points, but those are great details that I think that are important for agents, brokers, and the general public to know. Remax Experience and at Remax Lakes Realty, we've been tracking this for, I mean, a long time. I mean, we're talking more than a year. We've been working through this for the better part of the year, developing paperwork processes, correct documents, a training plan for our agents. It's important for our, agents and the general public to have the exact same information, so they're able to make educated decisions on what's in their best interest for buying or selling a home, right? And realtors have to be educated on what best practices are, and frankly, what Iowa law is, what state law is, what national law is. So, as far as that goes, buyer representation agreements, okay? So, they've existed. There's been buyer representation agreements that have been out there. Some people have used them, some people haven't, but they were never required. And so buyer representations as of July 1st went into state law. And basically, what does that mean? Like, what is a buyer representation agreement? Well, what I love about our buyer representation agreement is it does outline all of the services and duties and fiduciary duties that we have to our clients through the home buying process, right? Not only, anybody can, you can go find a home, but can you get a home, right? And these duties that are on this buyer's agency agreement talk about all the different ways that agent is going to do that. It also talks about what the duties of the buyer, basically, exclusively working with that agent, being, making sure that they're keeping them informed on their thoughts on different properties, putting in offers timely when needed, just a few different things there that they have responsibilities for as well. And so when you were able to discuss that with a potential client, then comes up the idea of compensation. Okay. And on every buyer representation agreement, which every buyer will be required to have if they want an agent to show them a property, we'll state then for all those duties, here is the amount of compensation that will be paid through this contract, and then also, as we get into it deeper, through the transaction itself. So, we've signed listing agreements for years, right? We've had that to prove that this is a serious commitment between agent and client in regards to how this process is going to work. Now we're just doing it also on the buy side.
Yeah, and in a little bit more detail there, it's just different for agents and for the public. It's just different that sometimes before you even meet a client, at a property, you may not have had a ton of discussion yet, but before you walk that client into the house, you need to have this buyer representation agreement signed, which is outlining all of these duties. It's outlining the commission that now the buyer will owe their buyer's agent, and these two have never met before, right? The buyer and the buyer agent may have never met, so it's almost as if you're getting married without going on a date yet. Right. So it's a change. It's a change in the industry. And so we highly recommend that before you meet at the property to look at property, let's have that discussion. Have a discussion over the phone, meet at the office, and really take this seriously. Really, we want our agents to feel like a buyer is certainly just as important as a seller, right? We've, as Jeff said, we've always known how important that listing presentation was, and getting a listing agreement signed, and you spent hours preparing for it and things like that. But all of this time, a buyer and buyer's agent have never really felt the need, for the most part, to establish that relationship. And so that's really what the state is asking us to do, and that's what NAR is asking us to do, is to establish a relationship to where a buyer will feel committed, not only emotionally but also legally via this contract. And that's what we want. As buyer's agents, I don't think the public really realizes how much work you put into assisting a buyer. You're working nights, you're working weekends, you're sending them an alert, you're looking at the MLS every day, wondering if this is right for him and this is right for her. And it's time and effort. And then in the past, if you weren't using a buyer representation agreement, that buyer might call somebody on the listing on the yard sign and call them for an appointment, because a buyer has never really felt locked into their buyer's agent, because we as agents never did a good job of explaining it. We never did a good job of explaining our value. And so this simply gives us that opportunity. And we want every buyer to know exactly what we do for them, what is our value, right? Because we want that same emotional and contractual relationship that we have with our sellers when we sign a listing. And so I personally think that, and I can speak for Jeff as well, that these buyer representation agreements are a good thing. They are going to protect agents, and they're going to protect buyers also, because if buyers are just calling buyer agents willy-nilly that don't know anything about what these requirements are, and they just want to see a property and really don't want any other type of representation, that's really not our goal now. Our goal is to put as much effort into a buyer and buyer agency relationship as it is for a seller and listing agreement relationship. So,
no, Aaron, you're absolutely right. I mean, we've embraced this in regards to what an opportunity, really, to be able to really just dive in and discuss with a buyer the entire process, front to back, what all that is going to look like, what all this entails, how intricate. We are real estate professionals. We're pros, right? We're on the same level as attorneys, CPAs, and things like that, because we are experts in our craft, right? And I think that Aaron made a good point in calling on a listing agent. And if you are a listing agent, or we all do both listing, we're listing agents, we're buyer agents. If a client, or if a potential client calls you off the listing sign, and you want to show that property, or you want to offer real estate services, you're still required to sign a buyer agency agreement with that buyer, because you, by Iowa law, are practicing as a buyer agent, right, in that regard. So that's important to know too, that from a playing field, right? Everybody's on a level playing field. That's how it's set up. So whether you're representing buyer A and you have a buyer out there that's a competitor for the same house, you both are going to have buyer agency agreements that are going to be signed. So that's.
Yeah, I want to touch on that a little bit more, Jeff, because it came up. I think it came up in an MLS meeting here a week or two ago, where there's some gray area and there's some confusion where some folks said, well, if I'm just like you just said, if I'm a listing agent and a buyer calls me on one of my properties, I don't have to sign a buyer representation agreement. That's it. Those are dangerous waters to get into, because the absolute only way that you would not be able to sign a buyer representation agreement is if you didn't say a word. If you can't offer specific assistance, right? You unlock the door and let that buyer go in the house without any assistance. Okay, that's the only way you can do it.
It's true. How many bathrooms are there? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, and so it doesn't make any sense. But then, if that's the only way you could legally do it, are you really going to let a buyer go into one of your listings unaccompanied? The answer is absolutely not. Your seller requires that client to be accompanied by a buyer's agent. So the whole point of that is, don't live in the gray area. You're going to get yourself in trouble. If you're showing a property, if you unlock a door for somebody, whatever it might be, get a buyer's representation agreement signed.
Mm-hmm. So I think, Aaron, do you want me to pop on to how that's kind of how we're discussing that with buyers. There's a way that we're also discussing this with sellers.
Absolutely.
Because the buyer's agency representation agreements, they impact both parties. That representation agreements with the buyer's broker. The listing agent has a contract with the listing, and through the process, we got to figure out from a negotiation standpoint, like, how everyone gets paid through the transaction, right? How does that work? It comes down to everything in the transaction, right? Whether it's commissions, whether it's appliances, whether it's the purchase price or inspections, All these different things are going to be agreed upon by buyer and seller. So, when discussing this with a seller, okay, and there's been some just fabulously awesome misleading headlines. I read an awesome article from Yahoo today that was from a couple months back, just as a refresher on this, on what awesome things have been put out there. But basically, you may run into, and there may be sellers on here that are looking at selling their property, and they may say, "Hey, I mean, I saw on MSNBC that I don't have to pay a buyer agent compensation anymore." Well, accurate statement to a certain degree. You could have paid a buyer agent $1 previous as well, right? That was always negotiable. You could always negotiate those things, okay? But what's in your best interest? What's in your best interest in that regard? Because we know that every buyer that walks through your home is going to have some sort of buyer agency or buyer representation agreement that's going to require compensation. We also know that, I'm going to paraphrase percentages here, but roughly 85% of transactions in the United States last year had a buyer agent included in the process. Okay, so if we're talking to sellers, it's in our client's best interest to maximize the pool that they are able to market to. We don't want to take it from 10 to 1.5, or 2 people in that buying pool. And Aaron, I'll let you kind of elaborate on some of those thoughts.
Yeah, no question. But in this, we're talking buyer agency and buyer representation, but the discussion that you have with your sellers and with the public is just as important because it affects them supremely. And the reason being, as Jeff just said, every buyer is required to pay X amount of compensation to their buyer's agent. We know what we charge at Remax. We're not talking numbers, but that buyer is required to pay that, right? Now, the discussion that we have again with the seller is that, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we know that it's in your best interest to continue to offer buyer broker compensation, just like we have always done. We're just doing it a little differently now. And Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this compensation's never been required, and it's always been negotiable, and the system has worked for a long time. Okay, now why is it so important to continue to offer this? And the reason is very simple. The buyer, historically, the seller just automatically paid that, and then the broker shared that commission. The listing broker shared that commission with the buying broker. And now we're really getting to a point where that sharing is going away, and the seller is paying a listing broker, and in essence, the seller is paying a buyer's broker. And why that seller just doesn't understand, why should I pay for the buyer agent, right? They're not even my client. Why am I doing this? The answer is simple. And Jeff just talked about a lot of this, but the main point is that most buyers, when it comes to the time of making an offer, and certainly when it comes time to closing, they don't have the money in their bank account or in their piggy bank to pay that buyer's agent, which is how it's always been, right? They barely have enough to pay their down payment, whether it's 3%, 5%, 20%, whatever that is. And so buyers historically have always been able to get their commission, their commission charge paid for through the settlement of the transaction as a seller's expense. That's how we've always done it, and that's how we're going to continue to do it. The process is just different because now, rather than a listing broker sharing that commission with the buyer's broker, the seller is just committing to paying a seller's the listing broker as well as the buyer's broker. And so the conversation is, yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we know that if you don't offer that commission right from the get-go, we're taking a huge risk of missing out on a tremendous number of buyers, because as Jeff alluded to earlier, most transactions had buyer representation, and most of those buyers that had that representation, there's no way they were going to be able to afford that commission. So so sellers need to understand how important that is, and it's no different. It's no different than other incentives that sellers will offer at listing time, right? How many listing presentations are we going through, or sit down and getting our listing paperwork signed, and we talk about, man, the appliances are shot, carpet shop, we need to offer an allowance. Let's offer an incentive for the buyer to purchase our home. And that incentive is, I will pay for your appliances. I will pay for your, I'll give you 10,000 bucks for carpet, for a carpet allowance. All of these different things that sellers have had no problem offering as an incentive. This is just another one. The buyer broker compensation is an incentive, just like those other. We'll pay up to $5,000 in closing costs, whatever. This is just another one of those incentives, and so.
Yeah. And I think that also along those lines, Aaron, talk about best practices in regards to the way the mechanism has worked previously to make it for sellers to maximize the amount of that buyers can make offers on their homes. Multiple offers is better than one offer, right? And also to maximize the ability for buyers to then purchase those properties, right? And to finance those properties and to bring the cash, because as we've talked about, it can be argued either way. Yes. Does it show up as a seller's expense? Could it show up as a seller's expense on the closing statement? It could. Is the buyer bringing all the funds to close out accounts and how that transaction is going to work? That's correct too. So that's kind of the mechanism that has worked. Now, the interesting piece and what I love, again, embracing the terminology is that no longer, and this is RE/MAX's stance, but we're not doing broker to broker agreements,
Sure.
right? There is no. This is something that I think that just having conversations that maybe some even seasoned agents have had a challenge wrapping their mind around, but there is no sharing. There is no broker. We decide together, broker pays this or broker pays that, or however that's going to work.
And that's for our offices.
For our office, excuse me, I should say for our offices. It's the way that we're looking at it. This is a contractual agreement between the buyer and seller that through this transaction, the buyer broker is compensated and the listing broker is compensated through their, whatever contracts that they have, with the buyer agent has with the buyer and the listing agent has the listing. But that's going to be agreed upon, just as what's the purchase price? Are the appliances staying? What are inspections? Is there an appraisal? What's the compensation? They're all going to be agreed upon, which is a good thing. That is a good thing.
It's a term of the agreement, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I think this is also a good time then to talk about how this transitions into what we call the buyer agent compensation addendum, and this is a document that our office developed with the help of our attorney, and it does just what Jeff said. We really think that the industry is going to move towards eliminating sharing between listing brokers and buying brokers, because that's really the essence of how the industry got in trouble in the first place, because they were removing the buyer from the opportunity of negotiating commissions. And so we believe that they're still going to frown upon broker to broker sharing agreements, because it still somewhat displaces the buyer from the equation. But they haven't done that yet, so they're perfectly legal. It's just not what we're going to do in our office. The seller, everything we're trying to get accomplished here from a negotiation standpoint, we want between the buyer and the seller, and get the agents and get the brokers out of that. So when we write an offer, we have what's called a buyer agent compensation addendum. And basically what this addendum does is it allows the opportunity for a buyer to request from the seller that the seller will pay for the buyer's contractual obligation, the buyer agent commission, through the settlement of the transaction, as a seller expense that's funded by the buyer. We can all argue, well, who's really paying for the commissions? I mean, the buyer's the one bringing the money to pay these commissions, but it ends up as a seller expense. So we can argue about that till we're blue in the face. But at the end of the day, all of the settlement is done through the settlement of the transaction. That includes, of course, that includes the commission, the real estate taxes, and transfer stamps, all of those things, right? So this is no different. But this addendum is the mechanism that allows this to happen. And so when we're speaking with our seller and saying, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we really believe it's in your best interest to offer this compensation because it maximizes our buyer pool. And oh, by the way, we're going to advertise the heck out of it and let the world know that you're willing to offer buyer agent compensation, because we want every single buyer out there to know that. And also, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we are going to make every single effort that we can a buyer and buyer's agent are going to make every effort that they can when they write an offer on your property. They're going to ask for that to be paid anyway. It's either going to be through an addendum or through the purchase agreement, where they're going to request that you help take care of their buyer agent compensation. And so what we're telling our sellers, they're going to ask for it anyway. Offer it right up front. That is in your best interest, because then you don't eliminate any buyers from wanting or being able to look at your property. We say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, it's all about the net at the end of the day anyway. What are you walking away with? Now, if you have to pay an agent, if you have to pay a buyer's agent X and you still walk away with what you're satisfied with, then it's a win. And you gave yourself a better opportunity from a marketing perspective from the hour that we listed it. And so we believe that sellers will continue to understand that, and that the process will continue to work similarly to what it always has. Anything I missed on that buyer agent compensation?
I
Jeff?
think I think that it leads into, another topic, because that's same topic, different way of saying it. But as you talked about, competitive advantage versus competitive disadvantage, and a competitive advantage is not only offering that, but having transparency in that, and discussing that with buyers, and making sure that, that you're listing, that buyers know that not only is it offered, but it's encouraged by the seller, that they're excited to offer that. Showing that not only on listing signs, but as we've talked about, this will be on a lot of our media material, website as well, because we think it maximizes the ability, again, for the seller to sell their property, but also it enhances the experience, the buyer experience, to understand that these are different. These are properties that I can work with, that I can fulfill my buyer contract.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that a buyer can't look at a property that doesn't offer compensation, but it's an incentive. It's just like anything else. And so it's our job, it's our duty as listing agents to explain this to our sellers, so they understand that it's all about the net. And if we have to offer X, Y, and Z in order to get to our net, then we need to do that. And like Jeff said, we're gonna market the heck out of it. It's competitive. It's a competitive advantage. You can see it on the sign behind him, on the sign behind me. Buyer agent compensation offered. And the other key thing is that I think most agents know, is that you are still able, according to the settlement, to display the buyer agent compensation that a seller is willing to offer on your own website. And so if you go to sellboji or sellsiouxcity.com right now, and you go to any of our listings, you're going to see if and how much a seller is willing to offer a buyer for their contractual obligation, to fulfill their contractual obligation. We think that's a huge competitive advantage, right? Because first of all, it's going to drive more buyers to our website. But secondly, it's out there. The buyer knows it immediately, without having to get to a point of writing an offer, filling out the addendum, and then wondering if the seller is going to play ball with them or not. So for us, we're taking a pretty specific stance on why we think it's so important. So
Absolutely. And in here a few minutes, we're going to open it up to, if you have any questions or any comments, you can throw them in the chat, and we'll definitely take a look at those. But a couple of things that we preemptively, I think, just we do have some great members from the public that are on here. The reason I know that is because I can tell, I know that that's not an agent, can tell from names, but I would say, one thing, we want to educate, but we also want to educate public on, well, what if you sign two agreements? What would occur if you were to meet with a buyer agent, sign that agreement, and then sign another one? Aaron, what would occur?
yeah, well, now you excuse me just a second. Now you have basically two contractual obligations, right? You sign two contracts. You're again, we're not attorneys, and we're not offering contract law, but you're under contract with two different buyer agents, and so that is not a good situation. What would happen here is that you better call both buyer agents and find out which one is going to let you out of that contract. Would be the first thing that I would advise as a broker, and also I would advise that buyer to call their attorney. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, as you're looking to from a seller standpoint, obviously you sit down hopefully with a number of agents, you're interviewing agents. You have a relationship with maybe an agent that you've sold a property with before, that you've had a great experience with and you're comfortable with. The same thing needs to be said about buyers agents, right? Reaching out to different buyers agents, interviewing agents, making sure that they understand this process and understand how this is going to work. And so you can pick the best agent that suits you, right? And that's at the end of the day, from a public standpoint, that's what we want, right? That's why we invited other agents to this, other brokerages, and we'll continue to do so, because from an industry standpoint, it is better that the industry is educated and the general public is educated in regards to what these changes mean, but also just the process in general.
Yeah, I think that you've hit all the points, and I feel like we've hit all the points that we wanted to. I think one of the main takeaways here is that most buyer agents have not been using buyer representation agreements. Hence most buyers have not been used. So it's a new thing, and don't be scared of them. Be committed to be committed to educating your buyers. Be committed to establishing that relationship right up front, because that's what this is going to be all about. And for you buyers out there, for the public, just as Jeff said, interview those agents. Make buying a home just as important as selling your home, because it is. I mean, you're gonna spend $500,000, you're gonna spend $50,000, whatever that the amount might be. You need to be equally protected by a good agent that's knowledgeable, that's educated. You need to be just as protected on the buyer side as you do the seller side, and that's what these buyer representation agreements are gonna helping us with, for helping the public and us as brokers and agents. So,
absolutely. If anybody has any questions, any comments in the chat, we can take a look at those. We're going to be doing some more of this, whether it's about this topic or other topics via Zoom. We also are looking at doing some live interactive stuff here, both in Lake Okoboji and in Sioux City. Obviously, in Sioux City, we do have a 200-seat movie theater, which is helpful. So we were looking at doing some seminars there, some live feeds, where we can answer more questions, bring in folks to do some of these seminars. We'll pick some cool spots to do it in Okoboji as well. But no, we just appreciate everybody that took the time to come out here and continue to educate yourself on what's going on. That's what we want to be. We want to be assets in our communities. Obviously, we love Siouxland, we love Okoboji, we love all the regions that we live in and that we work in. We want to make them better. We want to have as educated consumers as possible. We want to have the best agents in the country in our region. And so if we can in any way, shape, or form try to facilitate more information, we want to do so.
Yeah. Well, I second Jeff in thanking everybody for joining. It was very good to speak to everybody today. We did record this, and we have a question in the chat. Hold on a sec. It went away. Well, whoever just put something in the chat, I don't know if he deleted it, but it went away from me. Oh, there it is. Sorry. Okay. Law states every buyer needs an agreement before viewing homes. Does the law include details on how to cancel these if needed? The law doesn't. There's nothing in the settlement, and there's nothing in the Iowa code that talks about specific ways of canceling an agreement. But it would be similar to canceling a listing agreement, right? And at least in our office, we really, how do I say this? When we're talking with buyers and we explain to the buyer that, hey, even though we're in a 3-month relationship or a 6-month contract, whatever that might be, if at any time, you don't think that I'm doing my job, I'm not keeping up my end of the bargain of what the requirements were of a buyer's agent. And if you're not satisfied, maybe you don't like me, whatever it might be, we're going to be reasonable.
Not possible.
We're just simply going to be reasonable people, and we're going to let people out of their contract. We just are, because if a buyer isn't happy with our performance, that's one. Now, if they want out of my contract because they want to go behind my back and buy something without paying a commission, that's another thing. So, but anyway, hope that answers the question. Yeah, there's no state guidance or state requirement on how to cancel a contract. That's just between the broker and the buyer. What about one-time showing agreements? Are those a thing? Those are absolutely a thing. And we've trained our agents to kind of read the temperature of the room type deal when you're meeting your buyer for the first time. Our goal as buyer's agents is to have an extended contract. A typical listing agreement is 6 months, and a typical buyer representation agreement is going to be 6 months. But there's no doubt that we all as agents will be working with buyers that are not comfortable doing a 3-month agreement or a 6-month agreement, and they will demand only a 1-day agreement, and that is a thing, right? You can have a 1-day agreement, you can have a 12-hour agreement, whatever. It just has to be some specific time frame.
Okay.
Good questions. Okay. All right. So what I was saying, guys, we are recording this, and so we will have a link in case you want to share this. If there's any agents or brokers with us that you want to share it with your office, by all means, feel free. And even those friends of ours that are not agents and brokers, if you feel like this was educational, helpful, if you have friends that are starting to look for property or might start to look for property, please send the link. We'll get you the link, but send that link to them, and maybe they'll feel better about learning something today. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everybody.
everybody. We'll see you.